Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Thursday, July 6th. This is Africa 54. At least 17 people have died in an informal settlement in Gauteng Province east of Johannesburg after being poisoned in a gas leak. Racial tensions have flared into targeted violence against Sub-Saharan African migrants in Tunisia. Hundreds are now trying to flee the coastal city of Sfax. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says a multinational force is needed to help Haiti's national police, echoing a recent appeal made by the United Nations officials. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin with a sad story from South Africa, where the death toll from a leak of poisonous gas in a shantytown rose to 17 on Thursday, as officials suggested the accident was probably linked to illegal mining. One-year-old child is among the victims, according to the Premier of Gauteng Province. David Doyle has more.
At least 17 people have died in an informal settlement east of Johannesburg after being poisoned in a gas leak, the head of the provincial government said on Thursday. Panyaza Lesufi, Premier of South Africa's Gauteng Province, spoke to reporters as he visited the scene near Boksburg.
The scene was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. I regretted why we have to go through that scene. It was heartbreaking. So it's something that we might need assistance personally, because the bodies were scattered literally everywhere.
The youngest victim, he said, was 1 year old. It was not immediately clear what caused the leak, though one local official blamed it on an illegal mining operation that went wrong. Lesufi said investigations were underway to determine the type of gas involved.
Reuters filed that report. Racial tensions in the Tunisian coastal city of Sfax have flared into violence against migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa. Some witnesses say dozens were forcibly evicted from the city or have fled. Paul Ndiho has more.
Sub-Saharan African migrants are trying to purchase tickets to Tunis as they attempt to flee the violence in the coastal city of Sfax. The latest unrest started after the funeral of a 41-year-old Tunisian man who was stabbed to death Monday in an altercation between local residents and migrants, which led to arrests of 3 suspects from Cameroon. Rights groups say police have detained many migrants and removed hundreds of Sub-Saharan African migrants to a desolate area along the border with Libya, over 300 kilometers away. Congolese student Jonathan Tahumu says it seems all migrants are being blamed for the death of the Tunisian man, not just the one responsible.
There's a serious problem in Sfax. A Sub-Saharan has killed a Tunisian, and the Tunisian population is angry with all the Sub-Saharan. The Tunisian population is attacking Sub-Saharans, and even the Tunisian police are trying to illegally arrest Sub-Saharans to send them back across the desert to Libya. This is not normal. We're really scared to be here, so we want to leave Sfax at all costs.
Sfax, the North African country's second largest city, is a departure point for many migrants hoping to reach Italy by sea, often sailing to the island of Lampedusa, about 130 kilometers away.
He's a migrant who may have arrived through the desert. He might have caused trouble, and the Tunisians are mixing everyone up. We're now in a state of insecurity.
Hundreds of angry residents are massed in the streets of Sfax late Wednesday, demanding the eviction of all illegal migrants. Some blocked roads and set car tires ablaze. Video circulating on social media showed police chasing dozens of migrants from their homes to the cheers of the city residents before loading them into police cars. Tunisia has seen a rise in racially motivated attacks following President Kais Saied's comments in February, accusing hordes of illegal migrants of bringing violence and alleging a criminal plot to change the country's demographic makeup. With a population of 12 million people, Tunisia hosts an estimated 21,000 migrants from other parts of Africa, representing only 0.2% of the population. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
For more on the plight of Tunisian migrants, I'm joined live via Skype from Washington by Monji Dawada, president of Tunisian United Network and a native of Tunisia. Monji, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, another death and renewed racial tensions in Tunisia. What options does the international community have to ease these tensions?
Yes, unfortunately, once again, here we are talking about the crisis of African migrants in Tunisia. This is all happening, of course, with the backdrop of a major political and economic crisis that Tunisia has been shoved into since 2021, July 2021, by an authoritarian president who took all matters into his own hands. So when we spoke last time back in February, after this president decided to unleash some racist rants, we saw a lot of attacks against Sub-Saharan migrants in Tunisia, people who were beaten up and pushed out of their homes. And so the international community spoke out at that time. We remember, for example, the African Union put out a very good statement, a strong statement condemning those statements coming from President Kais Saied and highlighting the plight and the difficulties that the migrants are facing in Tunisia. So I think they need to do that again. I think at this time, they need to issue another statement raising the profile and paying attention, making people pay attention to what is happening in Tunisia. But I don't think they should stop at that point. I think the African Union, the United Nations, maybe the European Union, they need to send people in Tunisia. They need to sit down with President Saied and the authorities there, and they need to make sure that whatever strategy, whatever plans that the Tunisians develop, the Tunisian government develops, it is a strategy that takes into account not only the safety and security of Tunisians, but also the safety and security of all people there, including Sub-Saharan migrants, and develop a plan that's a comprehensive one, not just one that looks out for the interest of the Italians or the European Union, but it actually looks out for the interest of Tunisia, of the region, of the migrants. And this is why I think the involvement from the African Union is extremely important at this time.
Monji, as we await to see what the international community can do, what can be done by Tunisian authorities like President Kais Saied to ease these recurring tensions?
Yes. We saw him, for example, after those terrible statements that he made back in February, and when the international community condemned him, we saw him kind of walk back those statements and try to reassure people that he is not a racist, he's not advocating or issuing any racist policies. I think what he needs to do right now is guarantee the safety and security, as I said, of all people, Tunisians and the migrants. Right now, there is a lot of migrants who do not know what to do. They're facing backlash from the communities, for example, as your report indicated in Sfax, after the killing, the unfortunate killing of a Tunisian man. Now all the migrants are being targeted by vigilantes and by authorities. I think the Tunisian government needs to come down and provide safety and security for those neighborhoods and create safety and security centers where migrants could at least go and find basic needs and shelters provided to them, and then engage with the international community, the African Union, the United Nations, about what is the maybe safe and secure way to deal with these waves of migrants who are coming, who are trying not to actually stay in Tunisia, but they're trying to cross over to Europe. We need to find a comprehensive plan that implemented in Tunisia, as I said, that is good for everybody.
Thank you so much, Monji.
Thank you.
Monji Dawada is president of Tunisian United Network. Kenya's Interior Cabinet Secretary Kithure Kindiki says the country will delay reopening its border with Somalia because of a wave of attacks it blames on al-Qaeda-linked al-Shabaab militants. More than a dozen people have been killed along their shared border in the last month, part of what security analysts say are ongoing efforts by al-Shabaab to pressure Kenya into withdrawing its troops from peacekeeping missions in Somalia. In May, the two governments agreed to reopen several border posts, including Mandera, Liboi, and Kiunga, within 90 days. The posts have been closed since 2011, when Kenya sent its forces into southern Somalia to help fight al-Shabaab. The recent attacks from al-Shabaab have prompted Kenya to delay the border reopening. The planet's temperature spiked on Tuesday to its hottest day in at least 44 years and likely much longer. North Africa has recently seen temperatures near 50 degrees Celsius. Paolo Seppi, a climate scientist and lecturer at the Graham Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the Imperial College of London, tells VOA's Carol Van Dam Tuesday's sweltering heat underscores how some areas will be more affected by climate change than others, especially Africa.
Rainfall, so some regions are going to get drier, some are going to get wetter, and so you have risks associated with flooding on the one hand, but also droughts on the other hand, and that requires a solid water supply infrastructure, so you need to have the infrastructure in place to bring the water where it's needed. And again, countries are quite unequal in that respect.
Immediate impact of this, in North Africa, it was said that the temperature was recorded at 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh my gosh. I mean, how are people surviving in that kind of heat?
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, that points to the health impacts of climate change, and particularly the hot spells that are becoming both more frequent and more intense. Just to give some context, scientists have calculated, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change specifically in their last assessment report, they calculated that for 1 degree of global warming, and we're already at beyond that, 1 degree Celsius of global warming, we're at 1.2 degrees currently, we expect a 5-fold increase in the likelihood of an extreme heat wave that would have occurred only once in 50 years. So that's happening 5 times as often now. And at the same time, it's also more intense. Now, coming to your question, I would say, so there are studies showing that some regions on the globe are likely to become, at least at certain times, inhabitable. In a sense, you know, just being there will be a health hazard unless you have air conditioning and are in an air-conditioned room. So again, different countries and different societies will be very differently equipped to adapt to that, because it takes a lot of resource and energy also to have air conditioning.
It sounds to me that you're saying whole communities are going to have to move that don't have air conditioning. They're not like America. They don't have air conditioning where they can just, you know, if they don't have it in their own home, they can go to a shopping mall or something. They have no escape. So are these communities going to have to up and leave and be adding to the millions of people who are displaced?
Well, unfortunately, I'm sure that one of the impacts of climate change, one of the more indirect impacts, will be mass migration, or I think a lot of these impacts will be subtle in the sense that, you know, it's not always the case that the linkages are so clear, but you can expect, for example, that if in one region you're experiencing water stress and crop failures, that will add to the maybe existing political instability that's already ongoing. And so that will be an extra ingredient to the explosive mix that's already in place.
That was Paolo Seppi, a climate scientist at the Imperial College of London, speaking to VOA's Carol Van Dam. Studies show Africa's space sector is steadily expanding, with over 20 countries establishing national space initiatives and plans to launch more than 100 additional satellites by 2025. Ethiopian-American space scientist Dr. Brooke Lako, Associate Director for Planning and R&D Solar System Exploration at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, tells VOA's Jackson Vunganyi that it is necessary for Africa to be in space despite the cost.
Africa needs to be in space. There's no choice, in my view. Being behind in that area costs African nations quite a lot. For instance, for communication, for telephone, for education, remote education to their provinces and stuff, they pay hundreds of millions of dollars rent to get the bandwidth from private satellites and so on and so forth. Even if you look at that, it'd be enormous saving if they had their own communication satellite. And also now, with the miniaturization that I mentioned, you have CubeSats. They're like 10 centimeter cube. And that's one unit. You can have a 6U where you can have quite a few things. And that you can launch.
Is that what we hear when we, for example, like Uganda sent a satellite to space recently, and
Kenya did one.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, what's different about the Kenyan satellite? It was built by engineers from a private company in Kenya. That's a departure from
private sector investment in space in Africa is happening,
and was launched by SpaceX.
Yeah.
And so. That's very early stage, but it should be encouraged. I think Africa is wasting quite a bit of resources through internal wars and stuff. I'm not saying it's only in Africa, because wars happen around the world, as we know now. But leaders should make every effort possible to avoid these things and focus on what's important for the future. Being present in space is controlling your own financial transactions, controlling how you grow crops from space. You can map, you can see where moisture is low or high, and so on and so forth. It's even important for national security. So it's not a choice. You have to be there. And to do so, I think regional cooperations,
yes.
like Kenya has on San Marco Island, a launch pad that Italians used. It's near the equator. As you know, when you launch from the equator, you get the Earth rotates faster at the equator, so you get all that velocity attached to it. And so, the launch could be in Kenya. The satellite could be assembled in Uganda. Some of the electronics could be done in Ethiopia and so on. And
research happens some other places.
Yes, absolutely. It's not prohibitively difficult.
Right. I mean, prohibitive in terms of resources could be, but when you pool resources, I guess.
Absolutely.
But is Africa falling behind the space race at this point? Is that something that worries you?
It worries me, yes. Nigeria has done several iterations of space launch. For instance, they hired an English company that did their first satellite. They had their engineers go in England to work, but now they're gradually moving the control center in Nigeria and then doing some of the work in their own. So there's a lot of not highly organized Africa-wise, but these countries are trying.
That was Ethiopian-American space scientist Dr. Brooke Lacko, Associate Director for Planning and R&D Solar System Exploration Division at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. To hear more of his conversation on Africa and space exploration, listen to Upfront Show with Jackson Vunganyi at voaafrica.com/UP-Upfront. Still to come, a Nigerian street photographer and dancer finds solace in salsa and offers free classes for people dealing with depression and anxiety. We'll be right back. In other African news, mothers and campaigners in Egypt are counting on President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's signal that he backs an overhaul of 71-year-old guardianship laws which deprive millions of women control over financial and educational decisions for their children. Under the laws, fathers are default legal guardians of minors with sole control over financial and academic affairs. In the case of a father's death, guardianship transfers to the paternal grandfather, supervised by civil courts. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has ordered the suspension of a newly introduced 10% tax on single-use plastics and excise duty on some locally manufactured products to reduce business costs in Africa's biggest economy. Nigeria is one of the biggest plastic polluters on the continent, contributing some 2.5 million tons of plastic waste annually, some of which end up in the sea. And Zambia's kwacha and Kenya's shilling are forecast to weaken against the dollar in the week to next Thursday. According to Access Bank, the kwacha is anticipated to follow a downward trend in the near term if current market trends persist. Kenya's shilling is expected to remain on the back foot in the week ahead as persistent demand for dollars from oil importers and manufacturers weighs on the local currency. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says a multinational force is needed to help Haiti's national police as he echoed recent appeals made by UN officials who warned that the country's insecurity is worsening. Blinken briefly spoke about Haiti and other issues on Wednesday during a trip to Trinidad and Tobago. The Twin Island nation hosted a three-day conference of the 15-member Caribbean trade bloc known as CARICOM.
The United States shares the commitment felt throughout the region to help Haitian people shape their future, to restore the country's democratic order through free and fair elections. Haitians cannot achieve these critical goals without security.
Blinken also pledged nearly $5.5 million to help small farmers increase their productivity and access technology as the region fights climate change. He promised to keep pushing financial institutions to defer debt payments in the case of natural disasters. Apartheid ended in South Africa 3 decades ago, but black people still struggle to enter luxury sports like hot air ballooning. 44-year-old Kamane Harojane is in the process of busting through that ceiling, training to become the country's first black hot air balloon pilot. Zahir Kasim reports from Johannesburg.
In the cold and darkness, Kamane Harold Tijani gets ready for a day's work of soaring through the skies. It's been over 20 years in the making, but with the help of the ballooning community, Tijani is breaking South Africa's color barrier for hot air balloon pilots.
When I came to ballooning, I was intrigued by the magic of flying. At first, seeing the magic of flying, I never realized that hot air can just raise up things and lift the heavy loads of people in it. And then I was intrigued by all that chemistry. And then it made me feel happy to see people so happy. And then I wanted to be part of the people who make people happy, because I feel like if there's happiness in the world, I mean, the world is a better place to live.
To become a commercial hot air balloon pilot, one must obtain a license and accumulate 100 hours of flying time. Tijani has passed all his exams and accumulated 40 hours in the air. After he completes his remaining 60 hours, he will be able to get a commercial license and get paid to take people up in the sky. The cost of accumulating hours is one of the main barriers to getting a license, explains Richard Bovel, chairman of the Balloon and Airship Federation of South Africa.
The biggest cost is obviously the balloon hire and the gas. Unfortunately, gas is linked to the petrol price, so as we all know, that goes up and down prolifically. So yes, it is an expensive hobby, and that's it. Then, as I said earlier on, there are all the exams that one has to do. There's medical exams, etc., that student pilots have to go through.
Tijani's journey towards obtaining his license was made possible through the support of the Federation and the ballooning community. They provided him with a balloon to accumulate flying hours and assisted him in securing government funding for his license. Fellow pilot Mark Nuttall believes that Tajane's patience and resilience have prepared him to be an exceptional pilot.
You certainly get to read all the weather conditions, you get your equipment, you get your crew, you make sure everything's in place, and then you take off and then, okay, what now? You know, conditions are not quite what the Met gave us, now you got to deal with it. It's like life itself, you got to accept those challenges and do it with a smile on your face.
As the morning unfolds, Tajane gracefully ascends into the sky, realizing his dream and elevating the aspirations of South Africans from all walks of life. Zahir Kasim for VOA News, Johannesburg.
Street photographer Emeka Adindu found solace from his mental health struggles in salsa dancing. Now he offers free classes in Nigeria's capital, in a country where issues such as depression and anxiety carry stigma. Angela Ukomadu reports.
Emeka Adindu says salsa saved his life. For the Nigerian street photographer and dancer, it offered solace as he grappled abuse, depression, and suicidal thoughts.
Salsa was the only thing that could make me smile. All those days I was battling, fighting with my demons, with my past, with my everything. Salsa was the only thing that makes me feel like living. The most interesting thing about living on earth was salsa.
Today, Adindu is bringing the healing power of the popular Latin dance to others. He offers free salsa classes in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. They are open to anyone going through trauma or those who just want to unwind and relax.
Because it's a couple dance. And when you dance with someone, there's no space for you to think about your sorrow. Because one, you're thinking about the music, you're thinking about the counts, the rhythm.
In culturally conservative Nigeria, mental health issues often carry a stigma. Mental health professionals like Dr. Nancy Ojinta say that stigma can exacerbate the situation, equating mental health struggles with spiritual problems.
It is not a spiritual problem, it is a health problem. You know, people always easily identify physical health. Okay, I have malaria, I have diabetes, hypertension. I think it's normal, but then when it comes to their brain being ill, they start trying to find another way to explain it away instead of knowing that it is one more illness.
According to a 2021 report from UNICEF, 1 in 6 Nigerians aged between 15 and 24 struggle with issues such as depression or anxiety. Adindu says salsa gave him love and happiness when he was most in need. Passing that on to others, he says, can be his gift to the world.
Gift to the world indeed. And that does it for us today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. And from all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.